All right. Well, something interesting happened this morning. Actually, over the last few weeks, we made a purchase here at the church to get 2 cameras. Some of you don't know this, but our services are posted online later in the week. And Jay made the comment that when we only had 1 camera angle, it was kind of boring to watch. So we got a second camera angle, and I'm like, a second camera angle is not going to make it any less boring. I mean, it's going to be boring from 2 vantage points, you know? So anyway, it's kind of a different thing, but I tried not to take that as an insult, and, you know, but my feelings are pretty hurt to begin 2016, but we'll deal with it. So today is the first Sunday of 2016. Think of it this way. You will never attend a worship service on January 3rd of 2016 ever again. Right? It's the first Sunday of 2016. There will never be another first Sunday of 2016. You know, today is the first Sunday. It's the first worship service. So this is the first time that you'll pass 10:35 on Sunday, January 3rd, 2016, and you'll never pass this way before. And in fact, before you came today, nobody had ever lived January 3rd of 2016 before today, right? Nobody had like the flux capacitor, the DeLorean went back in time or came forward, right? This is your first time to live this day. This is your first time into 2016. When we rang in the new year a couple days ago, it was the first day of 2016, and you'll never live that day again. But prior to that day, you had never lived that day before. So it was a first for you. Today is a day that we celebrate first, and this is kind of a new beginning for a lot of us. We probably made some New Year's resolutions to eat healthier, but we had leftover Christmas cookies that we need to get those out of the house first, then we'll eat healthy. Amen? And how many of you already missed your New Year's resolution to exercise every day? I did too. Today will be my first day if I exercise of the new year with my resolution. But today is a first. And you know what? It got me thinking about it. Life is a series of firsts. Think about that for a second. You know, it's your first steps as a kid. Wes and Kristen were bragging today because Asa, their baby, is now kind of moving around. He's moving and walking a little bit. And, you know, it's a big deal when you take your first steps, the first words that your kids utter that are actually coherent, not just random duh sounds that you think they're saying dada, but they're really saying, I just need a diaper change or something like that. But your first words, your first steps, your first driver's license. Wow, that's really far in the rearview mirror for me. Your first car. My first car, do we have a picture of it? Were we able to get that up? Hey, a friend of mine from high school is here. She may or may not remember this car, okay? It was an 88 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. Don't forget that, right? So it was supremely awful, I'll tell you that right now. It was an embarrassment to drive it onto the parking lot of, you know, Aldine High School. And, you know, I'd see all the other kids that maybe they had a little bit more money than our family, and they had their nice rides, and here I come in my box car. And then after you get your first car, you have the first breakdown of that car at the Firefighters Credit Union. The timing chain broke, and so then you have your first 95 Geo Metro. Now, just imagine me in that for a moment. Now, I've put on about 40 pounds since high school, but still, I'm 6'1". I was 6'1" in high school. It was not a pretty picture for me to get out of that, but and then, you know, you grow up a little bit, and then you get your first minivan, and it's just over. I mean, life as you know it is done, and then you get your second minivan, and you're a complete loser then. And so, anyway, life is just a series of firsts, but admittedly, there are some firsts in our lives that are bigger than others. Your first day of college, your first job, first day on that job, your first career change. Did anybody in here ever make a career change? Like you started in something when you're 18 or 25, but then you made a career change? Just raise your hand. I want to see if anybody did that. That's a big moment, isn't it? To make a huge step like that. So there are a lot of firsts like that are bigger. Our first wedding day. Goodness, I remember the feeling on my wedding day, how crazy it was that I was going to be married to this wonderful woman. But man, it's like life as I knew it was changing, and I didn't know what those changes would feel and look like. Your first child, if you've had a kid, man, It's just an amazing first in your life. And I think that with the bigger the first, the bigger the fear. Like most of you didn't probably fear the first Sunday of 2016. You didn't fear today, hopefully. But when you're talking about a career change, the bigger the first, the bigger the fear. But after you've made a career change and you kind of see how that all plays out, it might make your second career change, if you have to make that decision, it might make it a little bit easier. I think the bigger the first, though, the bigger the fear. I was sitting in the choir room of Founder United Methodist Church about to get married, and I have to admit, I was scared. I knew this was the right thing, but there was so much unknown at that time. There was a lot of fear involved in that. My first job that I had, my first real big job that I had when I joined the when I became a fireman, and I went to class that first day, man, I was scared. I didn't want to mess it up. I wanted a job. I needed to provide for my family. So there's a lot of fear, and I think the bigger the first in our lives, the bigger the fear. I want you to find Joshua chapter 3 in your Bible, because for the people of Israel in Joshua chapter 3, they were about to encounter a huge first for them. Massive. And like I said, the bigger the first, you know that the bigger the fear. And if you missed last week, I'll kind of catch you up. When God appeared to Joshua and he said, Moses is dead. Now I want you to go and I want you to take the people into the promised land. He told him 3 times, be strong and be courageous. Be strong and be courageous. Be strong and be courageous, because anytime God is asking you to do something that is a first in your life, fear is always right at the door. And so God had to remind Joshua, you be strong and courageous. You face this first with great courage, not with fear. But fear is always present. I want you to read with me in Joshua chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. Then Joshua arose early in the morning, and he set out from Shittim, and they came to the Jordan, he and all the people of Israel. That's about a 6-mile journey, by the way. He and all the people of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, as soon as you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priest, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. Yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits, and that's about 3,500 feet or so, in length. Do not come near it, in order that you may know the way you shall go. And look at this phrase, for you have not passed this way before. This is going to be the first time that you pass this way. This is a first for them. God was taking His people from the wilderness where they were. He was going to have them cross over the Jordan River, and we're going to see that. He's going to have them cross over the Jordan River and go into the promised land. But He told them, you have never gone this way before. Now this is what God had promised Joshua. If you look in Joshua chapter 1, beginning at verse 10, and Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan and go in to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. Now for this entire nation of people, this entire community, God's people, this was the first time that they were going to cross into the promised land. For 40 years they had been wandering in the wilderness, and that is all they had known. For 40 years, an entire generation of people just wandering around in desert wilderness. And you can imagine that as crazy as it was for them to leave Egypt and be delivered the way that they were, and they crossed the Red Sea in that miraculous way. Remember when Moses held up the staff and the Red Sea parted and they crossed over. But for 40 years they were wandering in the wilderness. And just like me and you, they probably settled into some sort of routine or normalcy. You know, just getting up and wandering, moving your camp, moving the tent from place to place. That's just what happens when you wander in the wilderness. But now God was saying to them, there's a first. You and this entire people are going to pass over the Jordan River, and you're going to enter the promised land. And you'll remember in Joshua chapter 1, God told Joshua, everywhere that you go, I'm going to give you the land. No one's going to be able to stand against you. I'm going to be with you wherever you go. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. But that last phrase of Joshua chapter 3 and verse 4 is such a powerful reminder to us that every moment of our lives is a series of firsts. You have your first job, then you work 30 years and you retire, and then you have your first day of retirement. Every day is a first. Today is the first time you're going to live today. And tomorrow it's going to be another first. Every moment of your life is another first. And we don't look at it like that. We just kind of settle into the routine. But every day in the wilderness had been a day of first for the people of Israel. But God was saying to them now it's time for you to move forward. And you need to be careful. You need to listen to what I'm saying because you have never gone this way before. I was cleaning out files this week. That's kind of a thing that I do. I'm a file nerd. I organize my files. They are all alphabetical, and I have my little hanging file folders with the removable tabs. And when I insert a file, all the tabs in the entire file cabinet have to be shifted so they all line up. Anybody like that? All right, and if one of them's out of place or one of them's half, I'm like, it drives me crazy. So I clean out files this week, and I'm the guy that, I'm not really a hoarder of a lot of things, but I hoard files. So I had my checkbook, my first checkbook that Leslie and I kept when we were first married in the year 2000. I still had my apartment lease and all of the stubs for every month when we made payments, and we wrote checks. We actually wrote checks back then. It was crazy. And I had all of the canceled checks. I had all of my bank statements. But I actually just kind of looked down as I was cleaning out the files. I thought, this has got to be cool. I started looking through the year 2000, my checkbook, and it was unbelievable. There was a charge in there on my debit card to Mervyn's. Remember Mervyn's? They had awesome clothes, man. That's where I shopped, at Mervyn's. I don't even know if Mervyn's exists anymore, but they had one right there at Greenspoint Mall, and that's where it was crazy. I had Mervyn's in there. I had Foley's. Remember Foley's that got eaten up by Macy's? It was just kind of a cool thing to look back through, but so many firsts during the year 2000 for me. I signed my first apartment lease with my wife. I got married, and my first days of marriage, my first honeymoon. I remember when I got back from the honeymoon, this is a true story. Leslie and I had dated for about 9 months because I was not one of those guys. By the way, any of you that are single, we're not going to be engaged for over a year, okay? You put the ring on it, all right? If you like it, put the ring on it. That's what Beyonce said, and that's what you need to do too, okay? And so, we got married. We got married, and I said, when I got engaged the year before, I said, look, we're not going to be engaged over a year. We're going to be married sometime within the year 2000, and we were. We got married. We went on our honeymoon. It was a great time. We went for a week. And then when we got home, true story, I almost drove Leslie from the airport to her parents' house to drop her off. Because I'm like, man, that was a fun week. Nice knowing you. Time, I guess, for you to go home. That's because that was what our normal was. When we had dated, I would go visit her, but she would stay with her parents. And when we would go out on a date, go to the movie or something, we would go and I'd take her back to her parents and drop her off. That was our normal. But now my life was different. I was married, and so it was my first day of marriage. And then when I came into my apartment that I'd had for about 2 weeks prior to that and kind of set it up the way I like, then she wanted to make some changes. And so that led to our first fight and then, the rest of it. First makeup and first set of flowers, all of those things. It was a year of crazy firsts. I found a letter in my files, true story, where I wrote a letter to my credit union, Firefighters Credit Union, where my 88 Oldsmobile Cutlass broke down. And I was disputing a charge for $4.97 at Astroworld. Astroworld had charged me 3 times. I didn't dispute the first charge, but I said they have charged me 2 times and I didn't buy those other things. And they ended up crediting my account. I looked for it. It was really awesome. It was just great time. But it's so many firsts that year. The year 2000 was just a crazy year for me. And in 2015, I had another first. Back in September, many of you know this, we adopted our first kid. That was a crazy moment for us. Just an unbelievable journey. But it was another first in our lives. Can you imagine the fear that Joshua was feeling in this moment? I mean, God, I've never led this way before. You're asking me to go into the promised land, and all I've been mentored to do is to help people wandering in the wilderness. I've never gone this way before. I'm leading our people to conquer a land, and all we have is just a little intelligence. In Joshua chapter 2, they sent some spies into the land, and they gathered some intelligence about what was there. But here's Joshua about to lead this entire nation to a new home and a new place. Can you imagine the fear of the people that have been wandering for 40 years? And Joshua says, okay, prepare yourselves. We're going over this river into the land that God has promised us. There's the unknown. There's the vulnerability. There's the uprooting of your children from the wilderness to a new land. Every time God asks you to break through and move forward, there's always going to be fear. Always fear at the door. So I have a phrase that maybe you've said this before, you've heard it said. It's this: we've never done it that way before. You ever made that statement? I've never done that before. I've never done it that way before. These are considered by some the 7 words that can kill a church. Because many fights in churches begin when people say, well, we can't do that because we've never done it that way before. And if you look at it from fear, there's some truth to that. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of even loss. And then, yes, you say that phrase, you'd say, we've never done it that way before, and so we shouldn't do it. When Joshua told the people, we're going into the promised land, get yourself ready, don't you think some people said, hey, no, we've never done that before. We're pretty comfortable where we are. But if you look at it, look at that same statement, not from fear, but you look at it from faith, imagine how God would open it up. Man, Joshua, we're going across that river into the promised land. We've never gone that way before. But I'm with you. I'm going into that promised land. We've never had that kind of breakthrough. We've never had that. We've never had to have so much faith in this moment. We've never experienced such great a victory. See, the bigger the first, the bigger the fear. But I also would say this: the bigger the first, the bigger the faith you're going to need to break through. And the first step to breakthrough is a step of faith. There's something written throughout the story of Joshua. I want you to see it in verse 3 again. Let's read it again. And command the people, as soon as you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priest, then you shall set out from your place and what? Follow it. Now the ark of the covenant to the people of Israel was a symbol of God's presence. So Joshua told the priests, you pick up the ark and you carry it toward the river. And then he told the people, when you see the ark being carried by the priest, you get out of your tent, you leave where you are, and you follow the ark. And what Joshua was in essence saying symbolically to the people is, you don't follow me, I'm Joshua. You follow the ark of the covenant. You follow God. Anytime God is leading you to breakthrough, He's not asking you to follow anyone but Him. If the Ark of the Covenant stays on this side of the Jordan, you stay on this side of the Jordan. But if God leads the Ark of the Covenant and He's leading on the other side of the Jordan, you follow it. If you have to swim, if you have to build a bridge, if you have to get in a plane, you follow wherever the Ark of the Covenant is leading. It was a symbol of God's presence. But as you look at verse 4, you find something so important. In that verse, God told the people through Joshua, He told them, you stay back from the ark though. You stay back a couple thousand feet so that you can know the way that you're to go so that you may follow God. I take my kids hiking sometimes and we love to geocache. If you've never done it, if you got kids, it's a fun thing. Even as a couple, it's a fun thing to do. Geocaches are little like ammo boxes that people will just hide out off trails, and then all the state parks have them, all the national parks, they're all out here at Creekside. There's a ton of them out here. And there's an app that you can get, and it navigates you to the geocache. And in the geocaches, there are little prizes. You can sign a little register, and it's kind of a cool, fun thing to do on the weekend to get the kids out and get moving. But inevitably, this is what happens. We get to the geocache site. I've got my phone. I've got the app pulled up. It's got the map to the geocache. And I tell them, okay, we got to go down this trail. And inevitably, all of my kids are the same. We haven't gone with Ellie yet, but I'm sure it's going to be the same. They all think they know how to get to the geocache box. Oh, it's probably over here, Dad. And I'm like, oh, where all those thorns are tearing your legs up? Probably not. Because that's not the way it works. And so, I'll read, there'll be hints, there's descriptions. Some of them even have pictures. So you can see the tree. Okay, the geocache is by that tree. There's a GPS with a pin, and it will show you with an arrow which direction. So here I am with my phone, and all of my kids are walking in front of me. And I'm thinking to myself, like, do you not want to find this box? Or do you want to get grounded? And I'll tell them, hey, kids, stay with Daddy. I've got the GPS. But here's the thing. When they're walking in front of me, they can't know the way. They think they know the way, but they're trying to lead me, and I'm trying to lead them, and I know what the map says. Here's the thing about the Ark of the Covenant with the people. God didn't tell the people, line up in front of the ark and show God where you want to go. The ark goes first, and you follow it. And sometimes in our lives, don't we get it backwards? The reason that they were to stay back from the ark was so that the people wouldn't follow the wrong steps. They were to follow God. The first step to breakthrough is a step of faith. And when we get in front of God, this is what we do. We come up with our own plans. And we look at situations and we say, well, this is what I think we should do. And rather than the steps of breakthrough being steps of faith, it's not. It's just steps of logic. It's steps of human ingenuity. It's steps of resourcefulness. And let me tell you something. To balance a budget, it doesn't require faith. It requires math skills. You know what? To preach a sermon, to put together a message to deliver to people, many of you could write one if you were trained to do it. There's a certain skill set that you need in order to write messages. There are a lot of things that you can acquire skills for, but what the people of Israel needed, they didn't need faith in Joshua's plan. They didn't need to hear Joshua's voice. They didn't need to follow Joshua. They needed to follow God. And they didn't need to be in front of the ark. They needed to be behind it, because the ark is where God was leading them. God had something that He wanted to do for the people. And it wasn't going to be a feat of human ingenuity. God wasn't calling Joshua to lead the people to build a bridge. God led Nehemiah in the book of Nehemiah to build a wall. And that's what God wanted Nehemiah to do. That's what the Ark of the Covenant, so to speak, was leading Nehemiah and the people to do at that time. But at this time, God wanted Joshua and the people to simply follow the ark where it would lead. They didn't need faith in a brilliantly crafted statement or idea from Joshua. They needed to hear God's plan. They needed to see where God was leading, and they needed to follow. And know this about breakthrough. When God has you at a moment of breakthrough, it is never small. Let's read on in Joshua chapter 3, beginning at verse 5. Then Joshua said to the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." And Joshua said to the priest, "Take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on before the people." So they took up the Ark of the Covenant and went before the people. Joshua knew that for this nation, this was their moment to break through. And notice how he phrased it in verse 5. He didn't say, God's going to do something pretty cool. God's going to just kind of lead you to this, moment, and it's going to be all right. He said, God is going to do wonders among you. It kind of reminds me of the story that maybe you've heard it, of the eagle whose eggs got mixed up with the chickens. Have you heard this story? And so there was a great bald eagle which was born to fly and be majestic, but his egg got mismatched with some chicken eggs, and he hatches a chicken. So this great bald eagle is raised by these chickens, and the chickens teach him, well, here's how you eat off the ground. And so the bald eagle sat for his life and just pecked the grain off the ground. And he would look at his wings someday and say, man, it feels like I'm made for more than just this. And the chickens are like, no. You don't need to use those things. All the food you need is right here on the ground. And so for his entire life, this great, majestic bald eagle, which was made to soar and to hunt and to be a predator, lived his entire life as a chicken. And so many of us, as children of God, we are so satisfied pecking at the things of the world when God has gifted you and created you to do something spectacular. God didn't call the people out of Egypt so they could wander in the wilderness. He called them to go in the promised land. But they became satisfied with their life, and they grumbled and complained against God. And God said, fine, you can stay here and peck the dirt in the wilderness, but this generation's going to die off, and then a people will be raised up to go into the promised land. Here's the thing about Joshua. Joshua knew that God was calling them to soar. He said to them, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow God will do wonders among you. Because that's what God does. God doesn't do anything mediocre. Think about your salvation for a second. You're a sinner against God. You sinned against Him. You wronged Him. And because of your sin, we acquired the death penalty. We paid the price for our sins. But God, in His love and grace and mercy, died on the cross to make the payment for your sin. That is no small thing. God redeemed you. He saved you by His infinite, wonderful, matchless grace. That's not small. It's not menial. It's fascinating and it's wonderful. The virgin birth, miraculous or just ho-hum? When God works in our lives, when God leads us to the point of breakthrough, it is always going to be something wonderful. So let me ask you, in what areas of your life today, on January 3rd, 2016, now at about 11 o'clock a.m., in what areas of your life do you need a breakthrough this year? What are they? In your mind, I want you to list them. Relationships. Do you need a breakthrough in your married relationship? A relationship with a friend? You need a breakthrough with your finances? Are you tired of just the same old wandering around with your finances, never getting ahead, never seeing more month at the end of the money? What about your walk with God? Is it just dry and stale? Your relationship with your kids? What about your place of service? Some of you may have grown stagnant. You're not serving the way that you once were. Maybe it's your joy. Maybe it's reaching your friends who don't know Christ. Maybe you need a breakthrough with your kid. What is the area of your life where right now you're wandering in the wilderness and you need that breakthrough? Before we break through, there is a consecration that must take place. You heard Joshua say that to the people, right? He said, get yourselves ready, consecrate yourselves. Sometimes God wants to do something, but we have not fully dedicated our lives to Him. Think of consecration like this. Today at 12 o'clock, the Houston Texans are playing for their playoff life. And if you're a Texans fan, which you should be, if you're a Texans fan, you have consecrated 12 o'clock on Sundays because heaven knows they're not going to get enough Sunday night and Monday night games, okay, because they're that bad. But you consecrate that time. You set it aside. If you go to a restaurant while you're eating the chips and dip, you're just looking at that game. That's what it means to consecrate. It means to set it apart and to set it aside. And Joshua told the people, God's going to do wonders among you tomorrow, but today you have to consecrate yourself. Joshua didn't need to consecrate the people. He didn't need to, as a priest, just spread out a blessing over the people. No, he said, you consecrate yourselves. If you're wanting a breakthrough in your life, if you feel like God is moving you to that next place, you better stop waiting on your preacher to consecrate you. It ain't going to happen. You have to set yourself aside for God, and you have to say, God, whatever it is that you're going to do, whatever it is that you want me to do, I'm here and I'm available. But before you'll cross over, there has to be a consecration. So what you need to do today is set yourself aside for God's purpose as a parent. If you want a breakthrough with your kids, stop waiting on your kids to consecrate themselves. Heaven knows that ain't going to happen. You consecrate yourself. You dedicate yourself as a parent to God and say, you know what, I've given up hope on a better past. I may have messed things up over there, but today I'm going to set myself aside and I'm going to say, God, whatever it is that you want, I'll do it. Maybe you as a financial manager, you need to set yourself aside. You need to consecrate yourself and say, God, you have blessed us. Now tell me, God, what it is that you want to do with my checkbook and with my money. What is it? What area of my life am I not being obedient to you with my finances? Maybe you need to set yourself aside and consecrate yourself as a spouse. And stop trying to wait on the spouse or the other person to get themselves right and consecrate themselves. You consecrate yourself for the wonders that God is about to do in your life. There is fear, but the greater the first, the greater the faith that you're going to need to step through. The first step to breakthrough is a step of faith. And let me just tell you this, it's not just the first steps. Let's read beginning at verse 17, and we're going to read about 10 verses, so follow along. The Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And as for you, command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, when you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still where? In the Jordan." Do not miss that statement. They weren't going to just bring the Ark of the Covenant to the Jordan River. He said, when the priests get in the river. So it wasn't just a step of faith to pick up the Ark of the Covenant. That was the first step. Joshua said, pick it up and take it before the people. And they did that. Now he's going to tell them, now you're going to carry the ark to the river. There's another step of faith. But now you're going to have to stand in the river for something to happen. And Joshua said in verse 9, Joshua said to the people of Israel, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God." There's an important distinction there. Joshua isn't saying, "Come listen to me, listen to my voice." He says, this is what God has revealed to me. You listen to Him. You follow the ark. You listen to His voice. Because at any moment, Joshua could die. At any moment, Robbie could be gone. You listen to the voice of God and you follow Him. You don't listen to the voice of Village Park. You don't listen to the voice of your parents who may be giving you bad advice. You don't listen to the voice of Christians. You listen for the voice of God. And yes, sometimes God's going to send Joshua in your life. Sometimes God's going to send a Christian. But the voice that you ultimately need to hear from, that you're consecrating yourself for, is the voice of God. Joshua says to them, listen to the words of the Lord. Verse 10, "Here is how you shall know that the living God is among you, and that He will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites and the Hittites, the Hivites and the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, from each tribe a man, and when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap. So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan, with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water, now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest, the waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those flowing down from the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off, and the people passed over opposite Jericho." And listen to this statement. "Now the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan." I mean, when God does something, He does wonders. He tells the people the ark is passing before you. And when those priests get in that water, when the soles of their feet get in the water, God is going to do something amazing. He is going to part this river that is in its flood stages right now. He's going to part this water. But the water would have never parted had at any step along the way the priests lost their faith. Because it's not just the first step of breakthrough that's a step of faith. Every step to breakthrough is a step of faith. Here's what God said to the people in this chapter. People, consecrate yourselves to the Lord. Priests, pick up the ark. People, follow the ark. Priests, walk to the brink of the water. Priests, stand in the water. People, pass over. Every step of this breakthrough was another step of faith. And you have to take the first step of faith before you'll ever get to the second step. And you have to take the second step of faith before God's ever going to take you to the third step. And what we want is we want to be like my kids on the trail. We want the geocache box. We want the prize. And God's saying, you got to follow me every step of the way. And we're going to get to the prize. We're going to get to the promised land. But every step along the way to this breakthrough is a step of faith. You're going to have to trust me. You're going to have to follow what I'm saying. In our first checkbook, it was really overwhelming. Like I said, I found the charge to Astroworld and to Mervyn's, and that was awesome. But I began to look for the deposits in our checkbook. And I kept looking and looking and looking and looking. And I saw like one for $100, and I'm like, surely that couldn't be payroll. Then you follow it over, sure enough, it was. And it was amazing. I actually did the numbers years ago. When Leslie and I were first married in the year 2000, we made just about $2,000 every month combined. We were both working full-time jobs. That's how much we made. And just on our debt payments, and I considered our apartment a part of our debt payment because we were under the contract and lease to take care of that, and that's the way I kind of operate. We were obligated for $2,200 a month. Student debts, computers, cars, just crazy. And we were making $2,000. That did not include groceries, and it did not include, some of our bills, electricity, things like that. Every month in my checkbook, as I was looking through it, I saw a recurring transaction. Belmar Baptist, 1st and 15th. That was the church I attended at the time. When Leslie and I got married, we made a decision that for us was a huge step of faith. We made a decision to honor God with our money. And we gave 10% of our income to God. That's where we started. And as I look at that checkbook, it was crazy. But as I look back at those 2 years, especially in those 2 years in that apartment, we never were late on our rent or a house payment. On our rent, on any bills. We always paid our debts. We were always on time. We never bounced a check. Never. In my entire life, I have never bounced a check. I'm not saying that to brag to you. What I'm saying to you is this, that we made a decision early in our marriage that this was one area of our lives where we were going to follow God's plan. And we just made the commitment. We're going to do it. And financially and numerically, mathematically, it did not add up. But somehow God provided. And as I looked, there were months when we'd have $3 left in our checking account. It was crazy. We were broke, but we were with Bon Jovi. We were living on a prayer. I'd take my hand, babe, we'll make it our day every day. Every day. But we lived our lives by faith in God. And God somehow worked it out. But I'll tell you this, we would have never gotten to that step of honoring God fully with our finances if we didn't take a first step. And that's just one area of my life where God has shown Himself to do wonders. I don't believe that God would have blessed us as He did at that time, where we were, even though financially we were strapped. It was tight. One time my mom came over and she went to the store. She felt bad for us. She bought us some groceries. We just didn't have a lot. But every single month we honored God with the first of our substance, every month. And it was non-negotiable. And I don't believe that God would have blessed us as He did had we not learned the first step toward generosity, and that is giving to God first. When we were boarding that plane in China in September, that was about step 200. But if we had never taken the first step in our hearts to say, okay, God, you're leading us to do this, we'll follow you. If we hadn't made that first step, we'd have never boarded that plane to China, and we'd have never brought Ellie home. But every step of the way, God revealed to us, this is what I want you to do. In 2016, we're praying for a breakthrough. And today, I want to ask you to consecrate yourselves for what God is calling us to do as a church. And here's our breakthrough. There's 3 areas of emphasis. The first one is to live intentionally. to find someone in your life that you can invest yourself in for the sake of the gospel. A friend, a neighbor, a spouse, a kid, it doesn't matter who it is, but find someone that you will today say, God, I will set myself aside to pour into the life of this person. This is where God's leading us to go, to live intentionally. The second one is to give generously. And I have it mapped out for you because everybody in here can give generously, but you got to take the first step. So for some of you today, the first step for you is to give for the first time. Some of you have never given any of your money to God and said, okay, God, I'm setting this aside for you. Your first step is to just give God something. And then the second step would then be to just give regularly. It could be $1 a week. I don't care. I don't see the finances. I don't know who gives and who doesn't. It's not my business. But to give regularly, just get in the habit of giving. And then work toward taking the next step, which is to give proportionally. For our family, the bottom line of our giving is 10%. And we work our way up from there. You might say, my gosh, 10%. I get it. But the Jordan River was at flood stage as well. But if the priests hadn't picked up the ark and come to the brink of the water and then stepped in, they'd have never gotten in. They'd have never crossed over. But you can do it. Not because of your power, but because of God. Not because of your ingenuity, not because of your math, because the math won't add up. But if you honor God, trust me, He will help you break through. And then the fourth thing is to give generously. I've shared with you, my wife and I made a big decision for our family in 2015 to every month, we just said, by faith, God, we're going to set aside a little bit of money. And it wasn't a lot. I promise you, it wasn't a lot. We set aside $40 a month. We said, we're just going to give this. And it was strapping us, but we're going to give this to anybody in need. And it didn't matter. And it was amazing over the course of the year, we were able to give some money to kids going on mission trips. We were able to give to a family in need this Thanksgiving. Just our family just gave it to them and said, hey, this is a blessing for you. And I'm not saying that to brag to you. Please don't misunderstand. But that was our next step of faith. So then 2016 comes and we're praying about our budget. And we said, okay, God, we want to be able to give more. And so we bumped that amount up just a little bit more. We bumped our giving up to the church a little bit more. Because we have found that God does wonders when we just trust Him every step of the way. With your relationships, with your finances, live intentionally, give generously, and then serve faithfully. Every step to breakthrough is a step of faith. So let's read verse 17 again and we'll close. Now the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan. Now let's read it again. Now the parents who consecrated themselves to the Lord stood in the midst of the river, and their children passed on dry ground because parents made the decision to honor God with their lives. Now the husband stood in the middle of the Jordan River, bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord, while his wife passed on dry ground, because the husband made the decision to consecrate himself to the Lord. A single mother stood in the midst of the Jordan River, bearing the ark of the covenant for her children, because she consecrated herself to the Lord and said, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And all of her children passed through on dry ground. A couple stood in the river, Jordan, at its flood stages, holding the Ark of the Covenant. And their finances did so much better. Their giving increased, their generosity abounded, because they consecrated themselves to the Lord and said, we're going to give God something first. What's the area of your life that you need breakthrough? Read verse 17 this week over and over again, because it can be the story of your breakthrough, your life. But know this, every step of breakthrough, every step to breakthrough is a step of faith. So consecrate yourselves today. Pick up the ark, follow the ark, and let the soles of your feet rest in the river, and watch what God can do with your life. Let's pray together. Father, every step to breakthrough is a step of faith. What you called Joshua to was impossible, really. To cross this river where there was no real viable option, to go into a land where the enemies were great, and yet that's what you called him to do. and you did wonders among your people. And we ask that you do it here at Village Park as well. That as we look back at this year, when we're standing at the first day of 2017, we'll look back to this moment where husbands and wives and parents and grandparents and children consecrated themselves to you and said, God, what is it that you want me to do? What arc do I need to be following? Show me where to go. Order my steps, Lord. And you did wonders among us. So I pray again that you would help us to live intentionally. That's an area where I believe, God, with all my heart that you're calling us to look at the people in our lives, the relationships that you've given us as opportunities to share the hope that is found in Jesus. Help us to live intentionally. Help us to give generously. We've said from the beginning of this church, God, that we want to be a church that gives. And this week, putting checks in the mail to send out to ministries and missionaries was so fulfilling, God, because through the generosity of the people here, you helped us be able to bless other people. And so we give you praise and glory for that. And we just pray that you would increase that this year. Those who need to give for the first time, that they would make that faith-filled decision to give for the first time. Those who need to give regularly would do so and take that step of faith. And those who need to give proportionally, and those who need to take the step of generosity, that you would give us the faith that we need to take those steps, God. And may the soles of our feet touch the river with our giving. In serving faithfully, God, some of us have kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit. Our desire to serve you has taken a hit. Maybe it's circumstances. Maybe it's just that we've become disinterested. Maybe our relationship with you is stale. I pray that today we'd consecrate ourselves. We would set ourselves aside and we say to you today, Lord, God, what is it that you want from me? I'll do it. I'll follow you wherever you want me to go. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.